Okay, Hannah, it's great to have you here in our conversation at See You Belong. What a pleasure to be talking to you today. Thanks for making this possible. Thank you so much for taking the time. As far as I know, you're dialing in from the south of France today. Is that correct?
Exactly, Robert. Thank you so much for having me. I'm currently in Marseille. I came to visit family to spend a few days because it's Eid this week. And so we figured we would do our own kind of family holiday. It's wonderful. And like I told you, I did not expect this to be so wonderful because of the context. We're in the midst of a significant political turmoil after the results of the European elections and a few weeks away from the legislative elections that President Macron has called. And it's interesting to see the gap between the reality of here and the reality of the polls.
Yeah, I think we will be speaking about gaps quite often, not only today. And it's great to hear that the atmosphere is good and that you are in a good place right now. I mean, I will be trying to introduce you, although I know it might take up half of our interview time. I'll try to make it short nevertheless, but I would like to ask you to add whatever you think I was missing. You're originally from Morocco.
Mm-hmm.
You're currently, not today, but you're usually Lisbon based at the moment. You're a serial entrepreneur with an expertise at the intersection of tech and DEIB, sustainability, entrepreneurship, and international development, at least. You work with and in tech startups and nonprofits. In your role as a consultant, you've been doing business in more than 30, at least, African countries.
Mm-hmm.
You're the author of the book Being Other, in which you explore the concept of being marginalized and transforming it into a source of strength and empowerment. And of course, I would like to do justice to you and your phenomenal wisdom and your work within the next 30 or so minutes. And I would like to start exactly there in organizations. Organizations, for instance, which engage in diversity and inclusion. And in my opinion, they tend to avoid speaking about exactly what I've mentioned, like marginalization, discrimination, exclusion, before they jump to inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So from your experience, how can we engage in these more or less uncomfortable conversations with human beings who seem to lack empathy, who are perpetuating structural racism, sexism, and other forms of injustice?
Mm-hmm.
And who still believe they might somehow be victims too? How do we engage in these conversations? How do you?
I think it's a very difficult question to start with, and it's great that we're starting with this one. I think the first thing to do is it's a protocol, really, to be honest. I think of it as a protocol, as in the first step is really assessing our own intention and willingness to engage even. And what's behind it? Is it the idea or the notion that we want to impose our view of the world, kind of self-checking with ourselves? Or is it that we want to connect with someone else and on a basis of understanding and creating a space that is safe and authentic to share perspectives, to identify a common problem for being together and moving together in certain direction? As a matter of fact, a company is a group of people that believe or are invited to believe in a vision, a mission, and channel their resources and work together to bring outcomes and achieve this vision. So the first thing to do is really, am I in a place of wanting to connect? And I think it's important because if we're in that person that is more aware and more conscious for a number of reasons and has developed more empathy, then we have that responsibility of initiating from a healthy place. And then from there, it's an invitation. So sometimes it can be refused. that's also the risk to take. And it's difficult, you know, because you feel like when you so strongly believe in an idea and a solution that can enhance the collective, in terms of potential realized and you know, well-being together, then you're very much excited, you know, and so it's hard to accept and know. And that at the same time, that's the bet we need to take. So that's the invitation, the proposition, the offering, and I think doing this with as much grace as possible, as in elaborating or expressing, verbalizing a perspective and inviting the other to share a perspective, coming together around vocabulary that makes sense. It's a process. It's really it's complicated and it's complex, but eventually nailing, and that would be the third step, nailing the problem at hand. So that means narrowing down, you know, a number of issues and contexts and elements of influence, and where am I coming from, where are you coming from, what are the circumstances, hopes, dreams, aspirations, fears, and so on, to kind of clearly defining a common problem to solve together, an equation. And from there, you know, masterminding solutions. I think at the end of the day, I mean, I really think of it as a protocol, and because we need to simplify, and we need to simplify in a healthy way, not to be simplistic around identity topics, because that's an insult to our humanity, and at the same time it's helpful to play. And so I like to think of it as an equation to solve together, a board game to play together, and so from the moment we kind of have the strength to achieve that with this framing of, I check with myself regularly, have I come to integrity at all points, and am I coming into integrity at all points of interaction? Then it's an interesting start.
Wow, you've already mentioned so many things that I can relate to, not only in my work, but with all the conversations around these topics. And I just love the way you describe the kind of obligation we have to create a common ground for conversation and to help other people to engage. Because, I mean, the ones who think they are further down the road in this process, we tend to, you know, build bridges and then expect people to walk across these bridges. And I think it's important to build these bridges, but sometimes it's probably the wrong kinds of bridges, or maybe it's not the right angle, or whatever you want to translate this into. And I love that you mention your check-in that you do sometimes with yourself. Where am I? Have I kind of built the right roads towards a conversation or a chance for other people to engage? And I still find it difficult. And we've been, in our previous conversation, we also talked about gaps already. And for instance, you mentioned a gap between the level of resources and the level of awareness amongst people in so-called positions of power. And of course, we can talk about what kind of power that is. But talking about these gaps, would you like to elaborate a bit on that, about the gap between resources, lack of resources, and awareness?
Yes, I think I mentioned situation where I sat at the table of C-level executives of a very important American bank, and kind of understanding their power over managing a good $75 trillion. And my perspective, coming out of 4 years of Africa-focused, working with entrepreneurs in Africa, attempting to solve some of the world's greatest challenges, I was initially really frustrated with the lack of perspective, and how Africa was not even a thought, or African entrepreneurship, or the innovation that's happening on the continent was not even on the map for them. And so I was coming from that place originally, until I kind of like also did my own little journey into understanding that my role there was to bring awareness and bring information, and bring it in such a way that would be received as best as possible. And so from that initial trigger, I kind of like had to team up with other people to say, well, this is what's happening on the continent, and this is what sort of routes you can take into diversifying your portfolio and so on. Because then at the same time, I have to play with those people. If I'm going to be an effective change maker, why would I relinquish the opportunity to maybe have at some point someone who's a solid investor channel resources that are really needed into a direction where there's a dynamic ongoing, and there's a need for support. So I think yeah, I witnessed, this is one of those situations, because it's, given the amount of money that was discussed, that's for me one of the most salient. And at the same time, I come across so many of those situations where I navigate, and between words of passionate nonprofit builders, grassroots initiatives, leaders, entrepreneurs, creative entrepreneurs, that attempt, like regularly attempt, and they hit walls, and they get burnt out, and they have limited backup, as in financially, even family support, and so on. And they also are human beings. They go through a number of personal challenges at the same time, and other people that are taking different routes, and for whom other things matter, and they could do much more for healing the world, let's put it this way, or relieving some of the pressure, or addressing some of the challenges when it comes to peace building, access to education, mitigating the consequences of climate change, reducing biodiversity loss, access to healthcare, and so on and so forth. And so in a way, I have this privilege of kind of being there and roaming around and creating bridges as best as possible. But also my role is to make sense as well, and kind of keeping myself in check when it comes to doing this work in integrity. And so coming back to your question on, yes, there are those gaps, and what can we do with it? Our best possibility is to elevate the appetite for curiosity, and the appetite for action, and the appetite for collaboration. And that comes with, again, showing up in ingenuity, and with that concept of Nia that I mentioned to you last time, which is core to the Moroccan culture, which is clear and sincere intentions. And the sincerity of it is really important.
The sincerity that also creates the integrity you need. And I love that concept, because it creates kind of a powerful space for change makers to come back to, and to recalibrate, and to better understand, or rephrase the context in which you're in. And you have to have a negotiation between ends and means all the time, I think. And you so brilliantly pointed out, if this is the end that I want to achieve, then I need to understand what the means actually are, what my repertoire is in every single moment, and what I can bring across, and what I shouldn't start as a conversation, because people would be kind of alienated or put off. And I like that, and you're bringing it across in a very, very positive way that gives people like myself, who are struggling from time to time in very homogeneous, very cynical environments to still look at this common ground. And you said it's about grace. That's also a vocabulary that related or resonated with me quite a lot after our last conversation. You want to, when we try to initiate change in organizations or in societies, we really need to nurture this flow and to be aware of, at the same time, be aware of the different kinds of resistance there are, visible and invisible kinds of resistance at the same time. How can we become catalysts of flow? Is there a secret sauce, or is it just a combination of all the things you started mentioning?
I will answer this question. I want to first come back to the notion of changemaker, because we make it now, a job label, and it's beautiful in many ways because that acknowledges some of the significant work taken on by a number of people to really solve challenges that matter. And at the same time, I would tell you that many people that do not qualify as change makers and for whom this vocabulary feels very foreign, sometimes I have conversations with those people that typically sit at the top of companies and sit on resources that could be channeled in ways that could help those change makers. And if you spend enough time with them, kind of really listening to their frustrations, aspirations, everything that built up the personalities that they show up with at this point in time, you'll find that in everyone there's dreams. There are dreams to also kind of repair and make a positive contribution. And then cynicism came, that anger, that frustration, that incapacitation, that feeling completely disempowered, that acceptance of, well, we're gonna just do it because that's the way to do it.
The fragility that goes along with all this.
But the twisted fragility, because there's we need to make a difference between vulnerability and fragility that brings us down. Vulnerability showing up our limitations and our human selves, and our difficulties, and it's the base for connection, whereas the fragility that just wants to push back and be defensive, and then from there take a lot of power and remove itself from the shadows of this world and escape from it and be in a sort of survival mode anyway, because it's surviving from our condition of human beings being there to kind of create something that helps the next generations as well. And I find that there is a possible change maker in everyone, if only we could take time and really create the conditions of that potential to unfold gracefully. And it's about those influences. It's about timing as well, as in the rhythm. I was having this conversation just a week ago with someone who spent 30 years in investment banking and working in the global south in Brazil. And for many years, actually, we've been in touch. I was listening to his aspirations to set up this or that project, for communities, and it never really worked out. And and at the same time, I was listening to his advice on, no, but if you're gonna raise money for your new program, I mean, you need to speak this or that language. So, in like a very and I kind of had to acknowledge, the gap and just tell him, because we had built this level of trust to say, well, okay, if I'm gonna speak to people that only understand money, I'm gonna build you a one-pager and the slide deck and send it over to you. And you don't have to wait until a certain age to build your legacy. We reached that level of trust where I could, gently nudge him and kind of push him to look at the reality of, yes, you could be retiring now and you're thinking about your legacy, when I started thinking about it just, very early on. So in a way, a little bit competing, but in a very gentle way, as in with the aspiration that he takes the leap of really building something that makes sense for him, that feels aligned, that feels whole, that really feels like an expression of his soul. And at the same time, I'm more than happy to receive his very valuable advice, because of course he has 30 years of experience in building plans for projects that are much better funded than any project that I had ever built. We're talking about millions. And so that was an interesting interaction and fruitful one. My point is to say, I strongly believe that over time, and it took, in that case, 4 years of exchanging at a certain pace, that it's possible to at some point kind of speak one's truth and uplift each other in the capacity to make change.
That's very insightful. Again, of course. And 30
and coming back to flow now.
Yeah.
And coming back to flow, I love that you bring this up, because like I mentioned, many change makers that I've come across, and myself too, I think typically a few weeks ago, I was feeling very burnt out from months of really good work, and really filling me up, both advising, working with startups that have amazing projects, and being on a book tour and so on. And of course, at the same time, we have physical limitations, and we also come across situations that are ugly, when even in the realm of change making, and a lot of, that's perhaps one of the biggest gaps, seeing the gap between a beautiful mission and assignment and it not being fully enacted or endorsed in every single interaction with colleagues, employees, collaborators, and so on. And so that happens as well. And I think first of all, it's about paying allegiance to flow. It's about understanding that it's the most important approach, and that's what we're here for. We're here to flow, rather than, oh, I'm going to use my flow to do this. No, I'm in my flow because I know I do work that feels great. I reach some progress. I bring myself to balance and equanimity. I interact with people that understand what it's about and also give me tools, and I give them tools back. And that at some point you're kind of like, you're developing so many tools to have a sense of mastery of yourself, to channel it in the right direction. And so paying allegiance to flow and exploring what brings you to flow, and it changes over time, obviously. At some point, perhaps there are things that stabilize. For me, arts, music, dance, yoga, and a number of physical activities and energy exchanges and so on. But also it starts interweaving into work. And so that becomes really exciting. But I just want to insist on making, like, really paying allegiance to it and having this reverence to it, and understanding from that point that it's also the sacred right of any human being that you interact with. So coming back to the question of empathy, even when you're speaking with someone that definitely does not understand or appreciate the discourse over diversity, inclusion, critical race theory, fluidity, or whatever else, they also have a sacred right to flow. So what is it that you can co-create in an interaction that will bring maybe a certain level of discomfort, but also creates flow over time? So flow for oneself and flow for the other, flow in relationality. I think that's a worthwhile commitment.
And if we see flow as this common ground, and that the right that everybody has to experience flow, and the actual wish to do so, is such a positive reframing of this identity discourse that we're sometimes caught in and in between. And I love the way you made the distinction between fragility and vulnerability, because the former is kind of a, in my experience, a kind of a forward defense of people's identity. And at the same time, it's kind of a proof of their own integrity that they seem to have to state all the time. But you will never, you know, come across this gap and to really dive into vulnerability, which has, as you so rightly said, the potential to create this togetherness, to create this experience of flow in all of us. And the only thing I wanted to add about the 30 years experience that you mentioned with the guy that you had the conversation with, any 30-year experience in any field can also lead to path dependency somehow. And we all have to be aware of this. No matter how far we believe ourselves to be on the side of the positive change makers, as we said, there can be, and that's a very humbling thing of you to say in a very positive way. And I really like that, because I mean, otherwise we will always be drawing lines where we are on the right side of history because we put ourselves there. So maybe stop drawing lines in the first place would be a solution. Looking at the time, I could talk to you forever, as I said, but I want to talk about your book a little bit, and I want to give you the opportunity to speak about the book yourself. First of all, what was the motivation for the book? Of course, personal experience and a lot of wisdom that you've collected. And maybe you can talk a bit about the perspectives in the book and the way you were addressing this in order to give people access to maybe a different path.
So the book is called Being Other, The Beauty and Power of Being an Outsider. And I'll just show the cover, because I think the cover also speaks very much about the intention. After, let's say, a good chunk of my first part of career, I had an aspiration to make sense of the many intense situations I walked through, be it as a professional based in Paris, consultant working for large French corporates that had, you know, international development plans, or in the social entrepreneurship space that was nascent in France, or jumping back into Morocco. And I say jumping back because for me it was a massive leap after living 10 years in Europe and the US, and deciding on setting up the first, what was then the first North African coding bootcamp, and also what was my real hard project that was a grassroots initiative that became a nonprofit called edtech, bringing tech education to rural areas. And then from there, connecting with a number of fascinating entrepreneurs in the continent that were also repatriates, but also people, you know, that had decided to, you know, that had not necessarily left their region to study or else, but that wanted to make the best out of this digital revolutions, or these digital revolutions, to solve their communities' challenges. And so from there, working with African governments as a policy advisor for Smart Africa, and then it was, you know, a fantastic, thrilling, and at the same time, I came across so many situations where I just couldn't understand the resistance. You know, like I had my tools from my studies. I'm someone who decided early on to kind of dive into the actors network theory, the mapping controversies, everything that Bruno Latour had kind of conceptualized, and that was really helpful actually. And also use a number of other streams of knowledge, but the reality of like what I had to digest and overcome and transform and sublime, as emotional, spiritual, somatic kind of work. And I really had to bring it to words. And so initially, also in a way, kind of to back myself up, I did a number of research, and I thought I would make it more of an academic work. And it was called Integrity Lessons from the Beginning. And in coming across what felt like a very aligned publishing house and discussing with my editor, eventually we took that path of vulnerability and bringing it to my own voice, and some of the conversations that I've had that were more of one-on-one conversations with women that could relate, and that were also women from the global south or women from minority groups from the global north, that had a number of lessons to share, and that wanted to not just share them as, okay, these are the massive challenges that you're going to have to take on if you have that level of ambition, but also really let me attempt to make it not a roadmap, but a playbook, with tools and hope and strategy. And that's very much what Being Other is about. And the book itself, but also the book readings, the book talks that I've had the chance to do ever since its publication. The book was published on October 2023, and I've had the chance to present it in South Africa, in the UAE, in Davos, in India, crisscross the country, in Berlin, in London, in Accra. I mean, it's a good 16 masterclasses or workshops that I kind of derived from the book, and spoke to or presented it to more than 1,000 people across the globe. And I'm a few weeks away from continuing this book tour in the US and Canada. And it's been a massive, I mean, learning curve is not even a good description of it. It's been a
We
lot
could
of...
use exponentiality for learning
Exactly,
curves also.
exactly, because it gave me opportunities to really take deep dives into very current, difficult contexts, and with people that had and see from their perspective how they could use that that playbook of vulnerability for change, or yeah, vulnerability for change is a decent description.
I love the genesis of the way you wanted to write this book. As you said, it was thought to be more academic at first, and then your experience kind of came in, and you had to find a different path.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea of this not being a roadmap or a prescription, but rather a playbook of vulnerability. That's amazing. And I immediately had to think of a slide that I'm using sometimes when I'm in the middle of processes with, for instance, organizations. And it's just one sentence, and it says, drop your tools.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to do that from time to time, even though there are so many great tools and academic perspectives out there. You kind of have to combine them in a very empathetic way. You need to, in order to create flow on top of all these methods and tools, you sometimes have to just forget about them for a second. And I looked up where this phrase of drop your tools comes from. It's actually from firefighters. And they're in a dangerous situation. Then the commander says, drop your tools and everybody out. But if you transfer that to the processes you're part of, I find that really amazing. Is there any excerpt or part of your book that you would like to talk about now that is especially close to your heart? I mean, I can imagine the whole book is, but is there an excerpt that we might be able to include in this conversation? Or we can also put it into show notes, of course, but maybe
Absolutely.
there is a part that you would like to read now, and then we can, see where it takes us.
Yes. Well, I'll read the last paragraphs of the book if you allow me.
No spoiler alerts intended, though.
If we care about people, planet, purpose, regenerative and circular business models, decentralization, equity, fluid identities, inclusive workplaces, sensitive and conscious leadership, then women of color are a fount of resources and wisdom to tap into for the benefit of the collective. Their experiences of life are not new to them. This being in life in terms of race and gender is what they've always known. And this is the very angle that has given them the much needed wisdom and perspective. To be who I am, an Arab and African woman, is a blessing that I hereby offer to the world. If we seek organizations that value human beings beyond productivity and efficiency, beyond numbers and figures, and prioritize meaning, senses, and holistic well-being over shareholder value and the bottom line, then women of color are the trailblazers. These remarkable women have navigated injustices, finding ways to heal and become caretakers of themselves and others, while embodying a balanced approach to service. Because they've chosen integrity. Choosing integrity has been for them, as it has been for me, a journey of patience and audacity. It entails self-discovery and acceptance, as well as discerning which battles to step back from and which ones to advance toward. It is about knowing which seats to claim and which tables to build. It is a journey of exponential expansion, and choosing integrity is and always will be just the beginning.
That
and
was
then
beautiful.
There's an exercise.
There's an exercise. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we stop here because we're unfortunately running out of time again, but maybe this is just the beginning of longer conversations. I sincerely hope so. Thank you so much for bringing these thoughts to our attention and to all the people's attention who listen and read what Conscious You is all about. It's great knowing you out there. It gives me a lot of hope. Choosing integrity is something that I will think of for a very, very long time. And if I may say so, you are indeed a blessing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. It's been a blissful time.